You're listening to the Mezzo Guild podcast.
بس أنا لازم أحسه الأول عشان أقوله.
아직 나의 어색한 한국말이 짤따рат하고 지적하진 말아주세요.
Я хочу с тобой серьезно поговорить.
Really good news, Farragut. No, I can quit this Maldinas a here, sure.
Language learning, made simple. We just got back from Ireland. As I said recently, we decided to travel back to Ireland to spend some time in Munster, mostly in Kerry and Cork, including some of the Gaeltacht areas there. It was awesome to be back. Although I was in Ireland just a few years ago for my Irish immersion course in Donegal, very briefly, I was sad at the time to miss out on getting a chance to go back down to Cork to visit my old home, because I used to live there about a decade ago. This time it was high on my priority list. But it was an emotional experience for me. Something occurred to me as I was reflecting on the way that I felt when I arrived back into Cork City after so many years, and I wanted to share it today. Let me know if this is something that you can relate to. First, let me recap on something. Assimilation is a dirty word for some. In politics, it's the antithesis of multiculturalism, the notion that cultural identities can maintain their otherness, yet coexist harmoniously under a shared superficial identity. Along this line of politics, I can move to, let's say, Russia, learn to speak Russian, perhaps even identify as Russian in a legal sense, and yet feel no compulsion to ever change or adapt. Assimilation, on the other hand, is that if I move to Russia, I make every effort to become Russian. I cast off my Australian identity, at least while I live there. It's not just about respect, although that's a big part of it, but it's about demonstrating your commitment and your humility. Assimilators demonstrate their respect for and desire to be part of the host culture. Assimilators prove that they love the people they're learning to communicate with, where a multiculturalist comes with the mindset of, I'm here to teach you about my culture. Assimilators come with the mindset of, I'm here to learn about your culture. One is cultural snobbery, the other is cultural humility. And this is why I believe and have seen time and time again in my own travels that assimilators are inevitably better language learners. When you depart from a culture that you've assimilated into, there's always a part of you that's missing. You become a permanently fractured person. To have another language is to possess a second soul. You might have seen this quote floating around. In fact, I've said many times before that learning a foreign language is creating a new persona, another you. My very first Arabic teacher used to say this to me all the time, that after learning Arabic, I'll have another Donovan, quote unquote. Of course, you're always the same person, but in adopting a new way of communicating, you take on new traits, mannerisms, and behaviors. You might even adopt new values and see the world through different eyes. But what happens when it's time to move on or go home? Do you just forget about it? What about when you acquire multiple new personas? Something I'm feeling more and more lately is that it makes it incredibly challenging to settle down and just treat them as past experiences rather than parallel lives. Does this sound familiar to you at all? Now, we can only choose so many paths. We only have so much time and we can only be in one place at a time. I've lived in a lot of countries for mid to long term. I've learned the languages to a high level. I've assimilated deeply into those cultures, and then I've faced the inevitable point at which I had to leave. You become deeply entrenched into a place, a community, a language, and then just like that, it's severed. It's over. Whether it's going home or to another country, you find yourself disoriented and feeling as though a part of you has been ripped out and left behind. I've always found this especially hard with Egypt and Arabic. Living in places like South Korea and Russia, I had this constant desire to be back in Egypt. There are a few places that I have found enormously hard to let go of, and honestly, I may never fully let go of. I mean, sure, you can keep in touch on social media with old friends, you can go back and visit, as I just did in Cork, Ireland, but it's not the same. You go there to visit, and while there's something inside you saying this is home, you know it's not. And to paint a fairly grim analogy, it's kind of like having a dream of a deceased loved one. You get that fleeting moment of comfort having the person you love back, and then they're gone again. Now, this might be hard to relate to if you live close by the country and you visit it frequently. Maybe you won't have these detachment issues. This may sound crazy, but I occasionally envy people who have never moved abroad. There's a peace and a simplicity about leaving certain things unknown. And here's a quote or a verse that hit me really hard recently. It says, "For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more wisdom, the more grief." you don't really know what you've missed out on if you've never left home? Or is it that we're the ones who missed out by traveling too much? The question is not how do I maintain multiple languages, but rather how do I maintain multiple identities? This question about multiple language maintenance gets brought up all the time online. How do I keep up with all my languages? I think it's the wrong question, to be honest, at least it is for me. The question should be, how do I perpetuate my assimilation into all these cultures and never lose my Koreanness or my Egyptianness or my Russianness? This is the real challenge, and I'm not even sure if it's practically possible over the long term. The more that I've been thinking about it, it's really nothing to keep up with basic language maintenance and go over vocabulary here and there and have an occasional conversation or watch an occasional film to keep the language fresh in your mind. That's the easy part. The challenge is to not lose that other you, that second soul that you develop by assimilating into your host culture. It's out of that your language abilities and motivation flow. I've found, for example, with Korean, that the more I've drifted from Korean culture and kind of let go of my Koreanness, the more my Korean has suffered over the last 2 years. It's not lack of language exposure or practice. It's just a gradual drift away from Koreanness due to other language projects, time constraints, and geographical distance. So can you maintain multiple linguistic and cultural identities? Well, like I said, we only have so much time and we can only be in one place at a time. My problem is that there are just so many good options and I wish I could pursue all of them to the fullest. Eventually it comes down to deciding and prioritizing what matters most. There are some things that I've invested a year of my life into, like Korean, and then there are others that I've invested my entire adult life into, like Arabic, 15 plus years. I think it's about choosing what we're prepared to let go of and what we can never let go of.